You make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up 500,000 in soybeans and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories,
Your freedom.
the Peter Schiff Show.
Today's podcast is sponsored by NetSuite, the easy-to-use cloud-based business management software for every aspect of your business. Download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/gold. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/gold.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Hi, everybody. Well, as I had been expecting since the beginning, Donald Trump did something that hasn't been accomplished since the 1890s, when Grover Cleveland became the first president to succeed at serving 2 non-consecutive terms. Well, now Donald Trump becomes only the second man in history to pull that off. Now, Grover Cleveland, who happened to be a Democrat, is one of my favorite presidents. Unfortunately, though I supported Donald Trump, he is no Grover Cleveland, nor do I expect him to behave like Grover Cleveland. Now, before I kind of get into what happened in the markets and the reaction, to the win, I want to remind my audience why he won and why I was so confident for so long that he was going to win. He won because the economy is lousy. That's why. That's why he won the first time in 2016. That's why I predicted he was going to win in 2016. Because back in 2015, the media was selling the same BS, mainstream media, Wall Street, that we had a great economy. And they were trying to get the public to elect Hillary to continue the great economy from Barack Obama. Donald Trump was basically saying the same thing that I was. It was almost like he was watching my podcast and then going stumping on the campaign trail about how the economy was actually bad, how the numbers were a fraud, how the government numbers were lies, particularly the unemployment number. While Obama and Clinton were bragging about the low official unemployment rate, Donald Trump said, I don't care about that 5% unemployment rate. The real rate is 10%, 15%, 20%. Every time he would do another speech, he would up what the actual rate was. But whatever it was, Trump was right. Unemployment was much higher than what the government numbers pretended. And I knew his message was going to resonate with all the people living in the real economy. I remember the media back then kept saying, why don't the voters realize how good the economy is? Why is there a disconnect between the voters and the economy? And I was saying the disconnect is between the economy and the data. The public is right. The data is what's wrong. And so Trump was going to make America great again. This is all BS. The economy is a mess. It's lousy. I'm going to fix it. Take a chance on me. What do you got to lose? You've been reelecting these career politicians, and all they've done is screw things up. Why don't you give a businessman a shot? Let me come in there. I'll drain the swamp, and everything's going to get better, right? And so that message sold. It worked. He won. The problem is he was there for 4 years, and he didn't accomplish anything that he set out to accomplish. Yes, he cut taxes, but all that did is run up the deficit, especially since they increased government spending. Yes, he had a Republican House and a Republican Senate, just the way he's going to start off his second term. But they didn't do anything to reduce the deficit. The deficit went up. Even before COVID, the deficits went up. The trade deficits went up. He ran on bringing them down. They hit record highs. even before COVID. And then they hit even higher record highs after, when we reopened the economy. So he didn't achieve what he set out to achieve. The bubble got bigger under his watch, but it didn't pop, right? But beneath the surface, things were getting worse, even though the phony numbers didn't reveal that. Of course, once Trump became president, he no longer said the numbers were phony. In fact, he even joked about that as president. When somebody pointed out to him, he said, well, now that I'm president, they're real. So it's like he completely flip-flopped and all of a sudden embraced the very numbers he criticized. He did the same thing with the Fed. He was criticizing Janet Yellen for being too easy, and then he criticized Powell for being too tight, right? The same guy who's still there. But nobody seemed to mind the hypocrisy. But the reason that Trump didn't get reelected was because after 4 years, people were not, better off. Now, compared to the way they are now, yeah, they were. They weren't much better off or any better off than they were in 2016 and 2020, although they were flush with stimulus money from COVID. But they're way worse off now in 2024 than they were in 2020 or 2016. There's no doubt about that. But it's been the same media propaganda campaign. The mainstream media and Wall Street and the financial media have been trying to sell the public the same snake oil about how great the economy is, right? And they didn't buy it. And look, here's the funniest part. I'm watching last night, and I flipped through the channels, like, Fox, CNN, MSNBC. I enjoy watching the people on CNN and MSNBC, as they're, upset, that Trump is winning, so it's kind of entertaining to watch how upset they can get, and they're on the brink of tears. But I'm watching on MSNBC, and Rachel Maddow is getting so frustrated, on probably on the verge of crying, but extremely frustrated. And she's just screaming, how can this happen when the economy is so great? We've got the greatest economy ever. It's the envy of the world. It's booming. She said, inflation is gone. It's lower than it was under Trump. I mean, she was talking about this fantastic economy. How can this happen? How can Biden not be getting credit? How can we not be reelecting Kamala when everything is so great, right? She's actually saying this. She believes this nonsense. What makes it even more ridiculous is right before she went on this diatribe, of screaming about how great the economy was, they were putting up graphics from the exit polls, and where they asked the voters, what's your big issue, right? What are you most concerned about, and why did you vote the way you voted? The number one issue was the economy. It was the economy, and it was inflation, which is really the economy. Those are the two issues, the economy and inflation. Now, if the economy is good, that's not your number one issue. If the economy is good, you're content. The issue is something else. Maybe it's the environment. Maybe it's healthcare, whatever. You have some other concerns that are lower on your hierarchy of concerns. But when the economy is bad, that's when it's the biggest issue, right? It's the economy stupid when you have a bad economy. So Rachel Maddow, just watch this. She knows the voters are voting on the economy because it stinks. They're voting for Trump, the guy who's promising to change it. If everything was as great as Rachel Maddow claimed, why wouldn't the voters want to continue it? Obviously, it's because it's lousy and they can't take it anymore, and they're hoping that it changes. Inflation also was the number one issue. Not because it's come down so much, because it's still high, right? Inflation is not an issue when it's low. No one cares about it when it's low. It's only when it's high that it's an issue. So Trump won this time for the same reason he won in 2016, only by a bigger margin. He won the popular vote, I think, by about 5 million. He lost the popular vote in 2016. That's how much worse the economy is. He got 20% of the African-American vote. It dwarfs what he got. I think, he went up the first time. I think he got 8% and maybe 12%, 20%. That's the biggest percentage of the African-American vote that the Republicans had in, I don't know, 20 years or something like that. I think George Bush might have had a similar number, but the guy's supposed to be a racist, right? Yet he's getting more African-American support than other Republicans who supposedly weren't racist. Why did he get all these African-American votes? Because they're suffering in this economy. And a lot more African-Americans are suffering. They just couldn't, vote Republican. It's just so ingrained now in their culture to vote Democrat that they're voting Democrat, even though everything is lousy. They're still voting Democrat. But a record number of them now switched over. So the economy is worse than it was in 2016. So that's why Trump won by a bigger margin than he did in 2016. He won the popular vote. I think he got more electoral votes. So again, he gets the House and the U.S. Senate. But now that Trump has won, there's just a huge celebration going on. The Dow Jones was up 1,500 points today. That's 3.5%. The Dow, the NASDAQ, S&P Russell all hit new record highs today on the Trump win. Trump-specific stocks, right? Stocks that are tied to Trump, not just Donald Trump media. Although that stock actually was one of the weaker gainers. It lost most of its gains by the close, and I think actually was trading negative in after hours. But Elon Musk's company, Tesla, up like 14, 15%. Obviously he's buddies with Trump. That might bode well for his company. Big 40, 50% pop in the over-the-counter traded Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. There's a lot of big donors to the Trump campaign that own stock in Freddie and Fannie. They're confident that they're going to relaunch them, recapitalize and release and put those monsters back on the loose where they'll do even more damage than they've done before. But, Trump is, they think Trump is going to do this as a payback because the guys that own stock will make a killing when they're relaunched. So those stocks were up. All the financials, up 12, 13, 14, 15%. The big banks. Why did the big banks jump so much? Well, because Trump is going to deregulate banking. And normally I'm in favor of deregulation, but not banking because they don't deregulate enough. See, the problem with banks is you've got the government guaranteeing all the bank accounts, and you've got too big to fail, where they won't let the banks fail. They won't let the depositors lose money. You have all these subsidies that the government gives to the banks that basically removes all the free market regulation that would have otherwise been there to rein in their greed, right? See, normally in a free market, there's a balance between fear and greed, right? You want to make money, but you don't want to lose money. So you have to be cautious, which is a good thing. But in banking, the government comes in and says, don't worry about the risk. We got you covered. They tell the depositors, don't worry about what your bank does with the money. Even if your bank fails, you won't lose anything. Oh, you can loan money to the banks because we'll bail them out. And the executives, the guys that run the banks, they know, hey, we could take all kinds of risks, make a ton of money for ourselves. And when it blows up, we're just going to get bailed out so we don't lose. It's heads we win, tails the taxpayer loses. So in banking, it's almost not really two wrongs make a right, but two wrongs make a lesser wrong. So once you make the mistake of providing all these subsidies and government guarantees to banks, then the government needs to step up and regulate them because you've now eliminated the free market regulation. So now what they're going to do is deregulate the banks so that they can take even bigger risks with taxpayer money. And so it's just going to be more of the problem. It's going to be an inflationary element that's just going to add to what's going on. And so it's not even a good idea to deregulate banks, but it's, that's why the banks had a big move. Crypto, Bitcoin got above 76,000. That's an all-time record high. Bitcoin went way up today. In fact, as I am recording this podcast, Bitcoin is still above 75,000, 75,400. Now, of course, it's got a long way to go to get anywhere near a record high in the price of gold. Gold got clobbered today by about $80. It's now trading at 26.55, down another $5, I think, in the evening session. Silver was down about $1.50, still well above 30, but silver got hit because the dollar zoomed. You had about a 2% rise in the dollar index. Dollar rose across the board. What got killed were the bond market. You had a big rise in bond yields, as I've been saying, and I continue to predict that yields will keep rising. Yield on a 10-year treasury right now is 4.42%, and the yield on a 30-year is 4.58. The curve is pretty flat from 3 months all the way out to 30 years. That's going to change. That's going to normalize. These long-term rates are going way up. But for today, the stock market ignored the big rise in long-term interest rates, which it won't ignore forever or even that much longer. I think at some point soon, you're going to see the markets reacting to the reality of substantially higher interest rates because, the stock market had been rallying before the election. I mean, it's not new that it made a record high. It made plenty of record highs before the outcome of the election. The market was rallying on rate cuts and more easy money. Now, supposedly, it's rallying on deregulation and a stronger economy. But the market's not going to get the lower interest rates that it was expecting. It's going to get much, much higher interest rates, particularly on the long end of the curve. I would be surprised if the long-term 10-year yield was still below 5% when Trump takes office in January. It could be closer to 6% than 5%. And that is going to be a huge problem for the stock market and for the overall economy that is so levered up. Mortgage rates are going to hit new highs if we get a 6 handle on a 10-year U.S. Treasury, right? So everything the Fed was hoping to achieve by the rate cuts, the opposite will happen. And everything the markets were expecting, the opposite will happen. But right now, there's a lot of irrational exuberance. And I said this was coming. I mean, this was one of the things that I wasn't looking forward to with Trump win, although I did everything I could to advocate for Trump and I even voted for Trump here in Puerto Rico. Not that my vote counted. We had like a mock vote. And so this is the first time we were able to make a vote that didn't really count. So it's just symbolic. But I'm pretty sure that Harris won Puerto Rico in the symbolic, meaningless vote. But I cast mine anyway. But I wanted him to win because there's a lot of other things: freedom of speech, ending the wars. I mean, if he just ends this ridiculous war in the Ukraine, the lives that will be saved, right? The Ukrainians, the Russians. I mean, that alone is a reason to vote for somebody who's not a warmonger. Yeah, we'll also save a little money if we don't keep sending money to the Ukraine. But I think ending the war in the Ukraine is actually better for Europe than it is for the United States. But, we could do the world a favor by doing that. And there are a lot of other reasons to support Trump over Harris. But as I said in the last podcast, my biggest concern is Trump ran on a message of, a quick fix, a painless, immediate economic boom by promising tax cuts to everybody. And we're going to have just, an economic miracle again. He's going to fix what Biden broke. The problem is he can't fix it because he broke it more when he had the office the first time. He got a broken economy and broke it more and then gave it to Biden, who broke it even more. And now he's got it back. And he's promising to do more of the same that he did in 2016 in his first term, only on a bigger scale. And it's going to have an even worse effect. I'm going to get into all that in a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick commercial break. As a business owner, I know the challenge of navigating unpredictable markets, interest rates, and inflation. That's why having the right tools are essential. NetSuite streamlines operations and scales with growth. Over 40,000 businesses have already future-proofed their businesses with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP. NetSuite brings accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. NetSuite is the platform that I would choose, and you should too. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/gold. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/gold. That's netsuite.com/gold. All right, so let's take a look at the situation that exists today with Donald Trump coming into office, with the situation, or compare it to the situation in 2016. The economy is in much worse shape now than it was then. There's no question about it, that 8 years of more deficit spending, of a continuation of the hollowing out of our industrial base, all of the manufacturing jobs, the millions of manufacturing jobs that have been lost over that period of time, the record trade deficits and budget deficits that have been piled on, the enormity of the Fed's balance sheet, the final, we finally had inflation rearing its ugly head. We're just at the tip of that iceberg. But when Trump took office in 2016, the national debt was just under 20 trillion. As I am speaking, it's a hair under 36 trillion. We'll probably be at 36 trillion by my next podcast, even if I do it this week, which I probably will do, because we get an FOMC rate announcement tomorrow. Now, the FOMC should hike rates. I mean, that's what they should do. Based on what's happening, based on plunging bond prices, based on the inflationary and stimulative, in quotes, effect of these massive tax cuts that are coming, the Fed should be hiking, but it can't hike. I mean, it's got everybody ready for cuts. And so it's probably going to cut, because if they don't cut, if the Fed doesn't cut tomorrow, can you imagine Donald Trump and how they're going to react? This is political. You were going to cut rates, but now that I won, you're not cutting rates, right? So they're going to cut rates, but that should fuel the fire that's already burning in the bond market. That means we just get more stimulus, thrown on this overheated, to use that expression, which I don't really like, but economy. Long-term rates are just going to go up. But so $36 trillion national debt. So, and it'll probably be 37 trillion, because Trump doesn't take office for another few months. And we're probably going to, tack on another 500 billion to $1 trillion of debt during those final months of the Biden administration. So you have an 85% increase in the size of the national debt. When Trump took office in 2016, the annual budget deficits were high, but they were $665 billion. Now, they were actually higher than that. I'm talking about the official deficits, right? The unofficial ones were bigger, but I'm just going to compare the official deficits in 2016 to the official deficits in 2024. So when Trump came in before, he was dealing with a $665 billion annual deficit. The annual deficits now, the official ones, are over $2 trillion. So the size of the annual deficit is 3 times as big. So the problem is 3 times as great now. If you had to try to reduce the deficits, it's 3 times as difficult now as it was then. And he didn't even do it then. The deficits got worse on his first term. Even though he promised to lower them, he blew them up. It would have been easier to lower them then. Not that it would have been easy. It would have been hard, but it's way harder now, given how much larger they are. Now, when he came to office in 2016, the Fed funds rate was 0.5% to 0.75%. The Fed had just raised interest rates from 0. There were 2 hikes before he came in. So when he came in, it was 0.5%. So he still had the benefit of all this cheap money, right? Now rates are what, 4.75%? Yes, the Fed might cut a couple times, but they can't get anywhere near the really, really low rates that he enjoyed during the first term. So now we have a much bigger debt, much larger deficits, triple the size, and much higher interest rates that we have to pay to finance the deficits. Also, just to look at where gold was, because gold dropped today. Gold was only $1,200 an ounce when he took office. That was down from $1,900 in 2011. So gold was 37% below its peak from 5 years earlier. So it was kind of in a bear market. Now, we know it was in a building a base in a trading range. But of course, now, gold is making all-time highs. So you have a much more explosive situation than we had 8 years ago, right? We have much bigger debts and a much higher interest rate that we have to pay on it. And, we've got inflation that is already awoken from the dead and is, resurrected and now going to be a big problem. So where is all this optimism coming from? Well, a lot of it is coming from the fact that we got Elon Musk, right? I hear all this now all the time. Elon Musk, that's what's different. Elon Musk is going to come in here and cut government spending, right? He's going to slash government spending with his government efficiency department. Who knows how much that department's going to spend? And people think, oh, this time it's different. They're actually going to reduce the deficit substantially and really grow the economy. No, they're not. They're not even going to come close to doing that. First of all, even if Elon Musk could cut spending, discretionary spending, because he can't get into all the big ticket items that the president took off the chart, right? He can't touch Social Security, can't touch Medicare, probably not Medicaid, Obamacare, all that healthcare spending is off the table. He can't touch interest on the debt. That's just going up. And Trump wants to increase defense, so he can't make any cuts there. And so even if he was able to eliminate every other penny of government spending so that the only thing left for the government to do was to mail out the Social Security checks and the Medicare checks, but they didn't even pay the congressman, right? They eliminated the entirety of the government. You'd still have a deficit before they cut taxes, which of course we're not going to do. Maybe he can cut $100 billion a year, which would be amazing, but it's meaningless when you got a $7 trillion a year budget, right? It's a rounding error what they can try to achieve. Politicians have been promising for years to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. They never do it. Yes, when Elon Musk bought Twitter, he made major cuts, right? He had the kitchen sink and he went and, he got rid of a lot of dead wood. That's because he owned the company. He could do what he wants. He's not going to be able to do that with the government. Any real spending cuts are going to have to get approved by Congress. They're not going to vote for it. Congress already has proven they won't cut spending. They'll talk about it, but they won't actually do it. I'm 61 years old. This game has been going on for a long time. I can't even remember the names of all the fancy plans and acts that they passed over the years to handle the deficit. And none of them have worked. That's why we have $37 trillion in debt, because none of these plans ever amounted to anything. There were never any cuts. To the extent that they ever agreed on cuts, they were cuts that were going to take place at some far off future date. They would always kick in 4 or 5 years into the future. And you know what would happen before we actually got to the date where they kicked off? They would cancel them because nothing is set in stone. One Congress can't bind some future Congress. This is also, they can pretend they've cut spending, right? And they can budget it, in their books to make the deficits look smaller. All the projections for the debt assume that the Trump tax cuts expire. Well, clearly they're not going to expire. They're going to get renewed. So all this talk about efficiency in government, cutting government spending, rolling back government. This is all talk. We heard the same nonsense or rhetoric from Trump when he ran before in 2015, and they increased spending, increased warfare spending, increased welfare spending, blew up the deficit, despite promises to pay off the national debt and all kinds of grandiose promises that Trump made on the campaign trail. He didn't keep any of those promises. All he did was cut taxes, but he didn't really cut taxes. He replaced income taxes with the inflation tax. A lot of the inflation that has shown up under Biden was born under Trump. Trump just doesn't have to accept any responsibility because the official measure didn't really shoot up until Biden was in office. So that was a lucky break for Trump. And that really helped him in his election because he could say, look how low inflation was when I was president. But it wasn't low, it was high. Money supply expansion, that's inflation. The money supply boomed under Trump. The consequences were delayed until Biden was in office, but he made the same mistakes. Now, sure, Biden, compounded the mistakes. Who knows what Trump would have done differently had he had a second term, but the economy would be a mess if Trump was reelected, right? People want to pretend that it was great and just Biden screwed it up. It wasn't great. It was bad. It just got worse. And it's going to get worse under Trump. In fact, the only way it can get better is if it gets worse first. The problem is Trump didn't promise that. Trump didn't promise austerity. He didn't say, look, we have to pay the piper for decades of profligacy. We have to get our fiscal house in order. We got to tighten our belts. Nobody has to tighten their belts. Let them out, right? We have all this debt that the taxpayers are on the hook for. And what is Trump saying? I'm going to cut your taxes. How can he cut your taxes? We got to pay for all this government. I start out by saying that spending cuts never happen, right? Because every pork barrel spending plan has a constituency on the receiving end of that money. You're not going to get all the Republicans, even though they have the House, although the final votes haven't been counted, but I think it's like 95% probability that the Republicans have the House. They've got the Senate. But even if they have the House, you're not going to get all of the Republicans on board with significant spending cuts. They're just not going to do that because that's going to come back to bite them as far as they know when they have to get reelected. Now, there's going to be some Republicans that are in super safe districts where they don't have to worry about any kind of challenge. And so those guys might do it. But there are a lot of Republicans, they run in the House. You have to run every 2 years, right? So, it's not a long time. You cut people's benefits. They might not like that. And your opponent is going to use that against you. He did this. He took this away. So you're not going to get all the Republicans on board, and you're barely going to get any Democrats, if any. The Democrats could be unanimous and that, no, we're not going to cut this spending at all. And so they know they can't get all the Republicans, and the Democrats won't break ranks and vote for it. And so you're not going to get the spending cuts. But what you will get are the tax cuts. In fact, I don't see any way that we're not going to get these tax cuts because Trump's got the House and he's got the Senate. Nobody, maybe Rand Paul, I don't want to speak for him, but I don't know anybody that's going to stand in the way of this supposed Trump mandate. And who wants to say that, no, we can't have these tax cuts that Trump ran on and was elected on. And these are huge tax cuts that he is promising. And most of them are not growth-oriented cuts. They're basically Keynesian demand stimulus type of cuts, right? He wants to eliminate income taxes on tips. And believe me, right, once he does that, a lot of people who don't earn tips are going to start earning tips. You don't think that people are going to try to rearrange their compensation so that it's more tip-oriented? That's going to happen. You'll be surprised. I mean, they'll try to write the laws to prevent that, but they never can, right? Whenever the government is giving something away, people rearrange their affairs to qualify for what's being given away, right? So there's going to be a lot more people who are earning tips, and paying no taxes. Overtime too, same thing there. I mean, I don't know what the rules are going to be, but people are going to try to rearrange their work schedules and play around with their compensation so that more of their compensation can be logged as overtime so that they don't have to pay taxes on it, right? So it's going to cost more than they think when they exempt overtime. Social Security, same thing, huge cost to exempting Social Security from the income tax. But the waiters and waitresses and bartenders who have extra money in their pocket, they're not going to invest that money in growing the economy. They're not going to, put it in some bank that can loan it out to some entrepreneur, to invest in plant and equipment. They're just going to spend the money. 100% of those tax cuts are getting spent. I mean, people are drowning right now in debt. Inflation is killing them. They're going to spend every cent of that extra money bidding up prices. Same thing with people on Social Security. I mean, what do you think they're going to do with that money? They're going to spend it, right? They're old. They're retired. They're going to use the money. They don't have to save for their old age. They're already old, right? So that they're in their old age. They're going to spend the money. The workers working overtime going to spend the money. He also said we're going to cut taxes. What, for policemen? No taxes for policemen, firemen, military. I mean, there's so many people. Everybody is going to sign on to these tax cuts. Plus, they are going to extend the expiring Trump tax cuts and expand them. He wants to lower corporate taxes even more. Now, look, I'm all for lower taxes, but only if you have a smaller government so that you don't need the tax revenue. If you don't cut government, but you cut taxes, how are you paying for all that government? Well, you're paying for it with inflation. See, Trump promised to cut all these taxes, but he also promised lower inflation. You can't have both. If he cuts the taxes, we're going to have higher inflation. The inflation is the tax. He promised lower mortgage rates. Mortgage rates are going up. Credit card rates, all interest rates are going to have to go up because of these massive deficits. Now, so the markets are going to start to realize what's coming, that we're going to get the tax cuts for sure, and we're not going to get the spending cuts to offset it. Now, we will have tariffs, and that will somewhat offset the tax cuts because Americans will have more money because they're paying lower taxes, but the stuff they buy will be more expensive because of the tariffs. So they'll have more money to pay higher prices. So the tariffs will replace some of the revenue that the government loses to the tax cuts, but not anywhere close to all of it. It's going to be a net big loss of revenue to the government at a time when it actually needs a lot more revenue to cover the spending, which is going up, right? The spending is going to increase. Not only are they not going to cut spending, spending's going up because it's on autopilot. Even if they don't vote to increase it, it increases anyway. Unless you vote to decrease it, which they won't, it grows on autopilot. And so what I think is going to happen is the markets are going to bring this honeymoon to a close, maybe even before Trump is married with his, inauguration. The honeymoon could be over before the marriage starts because the bond market could rain on this parade. If you remember, it was in 2022. So Great Britain, they have budget deficits, not as big as ours. They have a debt problem, not as big as ours, but they've got a problem, right? So in 2022, because the economy was bad, right? They elected Liz Truss, right? Tory, she became the prime minister of the UK. And of course, she ran on tax cuts, right? That's what you do when you're, the Republican type candidate. You're in the UK, right? They're like the Republicans. So, hey, we want tax cuts. But the problem is you have a huge budget deficit. So how do you just cut taxes when you have a debt problem, right? You cut taxes, you make your underlying problem worse, which is what Trump is threatening to do. We have a badly malinvested economy. We don't save enough. We don't invest enough in real plant and equipment. We borrow too much. We spend too much. The whole economy is screwed up with these huge trade deficits, huge budget deficits. We need to fix that. But what Trump wants to do is fuel that. He just wants to make that, house of cards even bigger, right? So that when it collapses, it's even worse. So Liz Truss wanted to do the same thing. And so they proposed these tax cuts. And then what happened? The bond market collapsed, or the gilt market over in the UK. So the pound collapsed. And at one point, intraday, for the first time in history, the pound was worth less than $1. That had never happened before. And it bounced back. But for a brief moment in time, $1 bought more than 1 pound. And so rates were soaring. The bond market vigilantes awoke from their slumber and put a stop to the rate cuts and Liz Truss's tenure. She is now the shortest serving prime minister in the history of the UK. She was in office for all of 49 days. Now, the pound sterling isn't the world reserve currency, but the same situation applies to the United States. The debt is now so big, the budget deficit so large, and the movement to de-dollarize is already underway, despite the knee-jerk reaction today in the foreign exchange markets. I don't think the bond market is going to allow this, right? Interest rates are going to keep rising, and that may stop the tax cuts from ever arising, because we could actually have a crisis before Trump even takes the oath of office, which would be great news, because then it's hard to blame Trump. I mean, maybe they'll say, well, it's because people are worried about Trump. But if it happens while Biden is still in office, so much the better. But if we don't get a bond crisis that stops the tax cuts before they happen, we'll get a bond crisis after the tax cuts happen, which of course will be worse for the, blaming it on Trump. But it's going to happen. There is no way. Now, there's only one way that you could stop this, because the UK really didn't have, this ace up its sleeve like we do for now. The Fed is going to have to go back to QE, which is what I've been saying they're going to do. The only way to stop long-term interest rates from soaring and crushing the economy and the stock market and the banks and everything, right, that Trump is promising to pump up. The only way we can have these tax cuts, at least in the short run, is if the Fed goes back to quantitative easing to monetize the massive budget deficits that the tax cuts produce. Now, that is not bullish for the U.S. dollar. It's the opposite. That is not bearish for gold. It is the opposite. So I was talking about the Trump trade before and the stocks that were going up on anticipation of Trump winning that have still gone up. And, maybe the buy the rumor, sell the fact will take a little longer before the selling comes. But now the Trump trade is the inflation trade. Gold is now the Trump trade. Silver is the Trump trade. Mining stocks are the Trump trade. Big time. Because that is what Trump is going to produce. The markets have completely forgot about that in this euphoric celebration, right? The markets always look for a reason to rally, run the stops, get everybody hyped up and excited, overlooking what's happening in the bond market and that it's going to continue. And as it continues, it has to spill over into the stock market. Tomorrow will be a big day. And either I'll do another podcast tomorrow, I'll do it Friday. I mean, I might wait for Friday just to give people a chance to listen to this, because I know I got to talk about the reaction to what the Fed says. Although sometimes it takes the second day. Sometimes there's a knee-jerk reaction, and then you have the opposite reaction the following day. So maybe Friday would be a better time to kind of recap what happened on both Thursday and Friday and give people a chance to listen to this podcast. But, this is not, happy days are here again, and it's frustrating because I really wish I could celebrate. I got so many friends here. I had a bunch of people over my house on last night for a watch party, and we were up till like 2 a.m, like high-fiving and celebrating that Trump won. But to me, I have mixed feelings about it because I know what's coming, right? I know that all this is just BS, right? I mean, I'm glad that the voters chose Trump over, over Harris. But again, they wouldn't have chose Trump if he had told the truth. If he hadn't told so many promises that he can't possibly deliver. He bought all the votes, including the crypto community, pandering to them, get their money, get their votes. We're going to set up a Bitcoin reserve, right? So he was just giving out all kinds of money, promising the moon, and he can't deliver on it. And so I know this is not going to end well. And I'm still have the trepidation that it's going to be blamed because the media's already got the narrative. Because according to the media, the economy is great. Bidenomics worked like a charm. We have a great economy. Trump said he's going to fix it. If everything collapses right away, see what Trump did. And they're going to tie Trump to capitalism, free markets, deregulation, less government, right? So they're going to really hang this collapse on free market capitalism and Trump. And if you thought Kamala was left wing, wait till you see who we elected 4 years, because of this collapse. So I'm nervous about that, right? That was be careful what you wish for because it might happen. That's the one reason I said, well, if Harris wins, the one thing about it is at least, if it collapses on her, it's not going to be blamed on Republicans or Trump, even though, look, the Republicans bear a lot of responsibility for what happened. Look what happened with George Bush, George W. Bush in particular. I was highly critical of George Bush as other Republicans were singing his praise, like Larry Kudlow, who's probably going to be back in the Trump administration. We need more people to be critical of Trump. And I was critical, but I kind of tempered it a little bit before the election because I didn't want to get people not to vote for him. I mean, when you're looking at the alternative, but obviously now, people can't take their votes back. So he's president, whether you like it or not. But I can be far more critical of his policies that he's enacting. And it's very important. There needs to be more people to stand up and criticize what he's about to do. Because if you don't criticize it and it blows up like it will, you have no credibility to say, I told you so, or to offer any kind of solutions that anybody will buy. If you are just cheerleading Donald Trump with his tax cuts, right? And just, hop on board this Trump train, right? When it crashes or goes over the cliff, you're going down with it. And along with your reputation, you've got no credibility to then say, oh yeah, well, of course, here's what we need to do. No, you were on board with this. You were in favor of it. You didn't warn about this happening. So why should we believe anything that you say, right? If I'm out there and there's other free market libertarians, Austrian economists, hard money guys that will say this is a mistake. We can't afford these tax cuts. We need significant cuts to government spending. We need a real free market revolution in this country. And yes, in the short run, there's going to be losers. People who are getting government benefits are going to get fewer benefits, right? Some jobs have got to be lost. It may take a while to get them replaced. People are going to have to spend less. You're not going to take as many vacations. You're not going to replace your iPhone every year. You're going to have to be more frugal for a while because we had so many years of extravagance. We got to dial it down. So we've got to rebuild our savings, rebuild our capital. There's a light at the end of this tunnel, but it's a tunnel, right? Trump wants us to believe that there's no consequence to pay, right? Yes, we've had all these years of profligacy. We've run up all this debt. What's the solution? Tax cuts for everybody, right? There's no price to pay. If that's the case, why were we ever concerned about the deficit, right? If we could just slash taxes now with a $37 trillion deficit, well, obviously the deficit doesn't matter because we're cutting taxes in the face of it. We don't have to cut entitlements. They're off the table. In fact, we're increasing entitlements. That's what Trump is doing with Social Security. When you eliminate the tax, that is the same thing as increasing the benefits. Because when Social Security pays out, let's say, $1,000, and the recipient has to give the government back 200 of that 1,000, that's basically like a reduction in benefits, because it actually cost the government $800, not 1,000, because they gave 1,000 and they get a 200 back. But if they don't get the 200 back anymore because there's no tax on it anymore, now it's 1,000. It's like an increasing Social Security from $800 to $1,000. That's a big increase in a program that's already bankrupt, that's already running at $100+ billion annual deficit, right? The biggest government program is going to be even more expensive. And there's no way that anything Elon Musk does can even make a tiny dent in that. And that's just one of the giveaways that Trump is championing. Anyway, I want to just end the podcast though, and I'm not going to belabor the point. I know from the comment sections there are a lot of people that are tired of hearing about my bank, although maybe they're just more vocal in the comment section. I don't think it's a story that I could ever tire of telling, because I have to tell it because there's so much government corruption here. And it's important to shine a light on government corruption. Otherwise, it's going to continue. It's going to get worse. I mean, if you just let it happen and nobody talks about it, no one complains about it, you're just going to get more of it, right? The politicians are going to see that they can get away with it if nobody holds them to account, which is one of the primary reasons I filed a federal civil rights lawsuit on Monday here in federal court in Puerto Rico against former IRS Chief Jim Lee, current OSIF commissioner here in Puerto Rico, Natalia Zaccaria, the guy who they appointed to be the receiver of my bank, who's now been overseeing the complete disaster for the last 28 months when he's been sitting on a pile of cash and hasn't sent a nickel of it to the customers, but he sends plenty of it to himself. 15, 20 grand a month goes in his own pocket. He's got a great gig for somebody who had zero banking experience the day he was put in charge of my bank for no reason. But so he's in the lawsuit. I'm also suing in there. Hopefully I can get them served. The tax chiefs, Simon York in the UK, William Day in Australia, a few other guys in Canada and Netherlands that were all in on this conspiracy, as well as the journalists. And I put journalists in quote, Matthew Goldstein, Nick McKenzie, and what's her name? Charlotte Grieve, right? The two from The Age and one from the New York Times. I mean, we'll see if I can, get them into the conspiracy. A lot of it, I mean, I've named them as defendants. Whether they stay on as defendants, a lot of it will depend on discovery and the information. I have my suspicions, but remember, the reason I held off on filing this lawsuit for as long as I did was because I had suspicions that there was a conspiracy and, this wasn't on the up and up, because the commissioner told so many lies to justify what she did. Because remember, before she shut down my bank, she enthusiastically supported the sale of the bank. She loved the idea. She blessed it. She was great with it. And even before I found a buyer, and I had multiple buyers, when she told me that, because I told her I had to sell the bank because I was losing too much money because of the negative press. She's like, okay. And I said, if I don't find a buyer, I need to shut it down. And I was nervous because, I didn't want her, because I had low capital at the time, and I didn't want her to put the bank into receivership. So I expressed that concern, and she told me, don't worry. I'll never do that. If it comes down to it, if you can't sell the bank, you can liquidate it yourself. And she actually confirmed that to my lawyer a couple of weeks later, because she had a conversation and my lawyer emailed me and said, hey, the commissioner said that, you can self-liquidate the bank if you can't sell it. She won't appoint a receiver. So she's telling me, I love the sale. I'll never appoint a receiver. And then, several months later, she cancels the sale and throws the bank into receivership without an explanation, out of the blue, no reason. So I know this can't be. I mean, why would she do this? Why would she wreck a perfectly solvent bank for no reason? I've got a buyer who's infusing it with $8 million of additional capital. All the jobs are going to be protected. All the customers' accounts are going to be protected. It's great for Puerto Rico banking. good for me because I get out of jail. I sell the bank. I get, a payday. The bank, I sold it for a lot less than I could have sold it before all the negative publicity destroyed my brand, but at least I was going to get something, and no customers would be inconvenienced, and the bank would still be operating today, and they would have hired more people. I had 65 employees. They probably have 100 by now. It'd be a much bigger organization. The company that bought it was planning on expanding it. They gave their expansion plans to OSIF, including they were going to be making loans into the local Puerto Rican market, something that I didn't even do. So it was going to be great for Puerto Rico. And so she puts it in receivership and then has this big press conference. They've never had a press conference. OSIF, they've only had one press conference in history, and that was to announce the closing of my bank. Why would you have a press conference for that? The reason they shut down my bank was so they can have the press conference, because the IRS and J5 wanted to be there so they can take credit for the shutdown of the bank by pretending it was guilty of the very crimes that their own investigation proved it didn't commit. So they wanted to say, hey, look at us. Like, we're cracking down on tax evasion and money laundering. We shut down this bank, Euro Pacific Capital. See, we investigated them for tax evasion and money laundering. Yeah, they did. And they found no evidence of either. So instead of just ending the investigation and like, gee, that was a waste of time, I guess Schiff wasn't breaking any laws, they had to shut down an innocent bank so they can pretend that I was breaking the laws. But they couldn't pretend enough to indict me. They didn't indict anybody that worked at the bank. Right? I got 65 employees. Didn't one of them do something wrong? They investigated them for 2 years. As far as I know, they haven't even indicted any of the customers. I have thousands of them, and supposedly all these criminals. Well, why aren't any of them in jail? What? Nothing's happened. It's been like 4 years now. The whole thing was a con. But I found out in my FOIA request, even though of the 350 pages, and I showed them on this podcast, they were almost all completely redacted. I did find evidence, proof that I didn't have of a conspiracy, because there was emails going back and forth between IRS agents about the press conference in Puerto Rico to shut down my bank that didn't happen for 3 months. So for 3 months, the IRS knew that my bank was getting shut down, and they knew exactly when the press conference was. You know when they scheduled it? On the 4-year anniversary of the formation of the J5. So they held off on shutting down my bank for 3 months or more so they can commemorate the occasion of their anniversary. They knew it. The commissioner knew it. They lied about it for 3 months. They let me believe that they were still considering the sale to Quinta. I kept putting in fact, I added over $500,000 in capital between the time that they decided to shut my bank down and the time they told me they were going to shut my bank down. But they shut it down as an emergency because they claimed the bank was insolvent. So they had to act quickly to protect customers. Well, they knew that for 3 months. Why did they wait 3 months if it was such an emergency? And you know what they could have done while they were waiting? They could have said, hey, Peter, we're going to shut down your bank in 3 months for not having enough capital. Why don't you put some capital in now so that we don't have to shut it down? And I would have done it. In fact, I've got all the proof. I sat in the commissioner's office in November of 2001 and offered to put in $7 million into the bank, while she approved the sale of the bank. And then I would get my $7 million out when the buyer put their $8 million in. And she said, no, you don't have to do that. Everything is cool. You got plenty of money. You have enough capital. Just let the buyer put it in. You've done everything that you need to do. This is great. I put in 1.9 million anyway, because I was making up, the bank was losing 250, 300,000 a month. So I was coming out of my own pocket just to make sure the bank's capital didn't drop below maybe 2.5 million, wherever it was. I was using my own money to protect the depositors while I was waiting for OSIF to approve the sale. And OSIF knew that. She knew I was sitting there with a checkbook ready to put money into the bank. I had been putting in money in the bank, and she kept her mouth shut for all those months. And then, without any warning, shut the bank down for not having enough capital. And even after she shut it down, I offered to put the capital in if she would open it back up so that I can service the depositors and liquidate the bank myself. And she said no. Right. So the whole thing was an illegal conspiracy to deprive me of my constitutional rights, my presumption of innocence. I lost my property without any due process. Thousands of innocent customers were sacrificed. Scores of employees were sacrificed. So all these bureaucrats could pat each other on the back and spread a lie. And it was all done with the full cooperation of a complicit media The New York Times, the Age in Australia, took all this government propaganda and publicized it as if it was actually true. They fabricated evidence to make it appear that my bank was guilty, even though their own evidence showed that it was innocent. So I am shining a big light on this fraud. So I still have a long way to go. It's probably going to cost a lot of money, whenever you're suing, and I'm suing some real deep pockets because they don't spend their own money. They got taxpayer money to spend. I got to spend my money. But I think I'm doing a public service here, trying to expose this. Hopefully, with the Republicans in the U.S. Senate, maybe I can get somebody to take a look at this. I'd love to see a senatorial investigation of this criminal behavior from former chief of the IRS, Jim Lee. This goes all the way to the top of the IRS Criminal Enforcement Division, was headed by a criminal, right? The criminal division of the IRS was run by a criminal. He belongs in jail, not in a cushy private sector job that he parlayed after doing this. So maybe we can get a senatorial investigation. I had a problem with that when the Senate wasn't in the majority. So now that they're going to be, maybe I'll have better luck. But I've got this lawsuit. I'm going to put it online at some point. You'll be able to read the entire lawsuit. It's an good read. It kind of supports everything that I'm saying. And I'm not going to be seeking out a lot of press on this. I mean, I've been advised to kind of keep it low key. So I'm not going to publicize it really. I mean, I want everybody to know that I filed it. Certainly if I win, I'll publicize that. The key is to get around the motions to dismiss. Got to make sure it survives that. I really need to get to discovery. That's more important to me, honestly, than winning the money, is getting the truth out there. I want to get all the documents, the internal documents, the emails, the text messages. I want to get these government criminals under deposition on a witness stand. I mean, I want to get all this information out and then publicize it so the world can see exactly the criminal nature and the weaponization of not only the IRS, but these other tax agencies around the world. They're the real criminals, not honest people like me or the honest people that had accounts at my bank, but the government regulators, right? It's the cops that are the crooks. Anyway, that's it for today. I'm going to be doing another podcast in a couple of days. Don't forget, give me the thumbs up, leave your comment if you like this. And I've been encouraging people on every podcast. We got a lot of good newsletters coming out at Schiff Sovereign. So if you're missing any of those newsletters, make sure and go to schiffsovereign.com and sign up to get your free newsletter today. Bye for now.